Hello everybody, Maven here, and today we're doing the first of 3 in this series where I'm going to be doing strand builds for all 3 characters, but today we are starting off with the Titan because personally I'm main Titan in PvE, and it is the first class I chose when I launched Lightfall, so that's going to be the first video that I do a build on, so let's get to it. Hope you enjoy. So today's build is based around the brand new Abeyant Leap Exotic Boots. I got this at the end of the Legend campaign. I'd recommend doing that as Puppeteer's Control, so Drenger's Lash spawns 2 additional projectiles, tracks targets more aggressively and travels further, and you gain Woven Mail when suspending targets. So for those who don't know what Drenger's Lash is, I'll show you here. It is one of your aspects, and it says that when you cast your barricade, you spawn a seeker that will suspend a target. So Drenger's Lash normally creates 1 projectile that doesn't track very well, maybe hits 1 or 2 targets, so it's not that great. But with the boots, you create 3 projectiles that go further, faster, track better. It's a lot stronger. And also it has more synergy because when you suspend targets, you can grant Woven Mail, and that synergizes with Into the Fray. So while you have Woven Mail, your melee regeneration rate is increased. And remember, our Frenzied Blade melee ability has 3 charges, so this is also becoming a melee spam build because we're going to try to keep Woven Mail uptime pretty much 100% of the time. Now, since the point of this build is to suspend enemies like crazy, we have to think about how we can take advantage of that. What can we do to enemies while they're suspended? And no, Titan is not the only one that can suspend enemies. All 3 classes are capable of doing so, but the Titan more so because of this exotic and because of Drenger's Lash. So when an enemy is suspended, they cannot fight back. You can do however much damage you want to them. They will not fall out of suspension when you damage them. They will stay suspended until the suspension time limit runs out. So you have about a 5-second time window to really do whatever you want to them. So we're going to go over a plethora of weapons that you can use to take advantage of this. First up, we got the Cloud Strike, and it's pretty great that the enemy is staying completely still and they're suspended. Their crit is way up in the air, so you can hit it super easily and create those lightning strikes. Albeit it doesn't do as much damage as I'd want it to, but that's because my weapons in this video are not really infused. Since the season just began, all of my stuff is at minimum power, so it would be doing more. So the Cloud Strike is a pretty solid option if you like this sniper. Next is the Izanagi's Burden, and this one I would highly recommend messing around with more and trying it throughout several activities because it's very solid to be able to land those honed edge shots. Although there is a downside, if there's more enemies in the area shooting you from the sides, you can still potentially get flinched off, but it does a hefty amount of damage for seemingly free. Next up is the Legend of Acreus, and this one is another pretty solid choice because typically Trench Barrel is a pretty hard perk to proc. You have to run up in the face of danger to punch your enemy and then you get a damage boost, but if they're suspended, you simply just walk up, tickle their belly, and then you just blast them away. It's pretty strong. Next is the DMT. Now, sometimes with the DMT, it's a little bit hard to get Cranial Spike online, but you know, when they're suspended, that's basically free activation of Cranial Spike, so you can get that super fast fire rate. Not the best option in the world, but it's interesting. Next up, we have the Monte Carlo. Now, dealing damage with this weapon is going to reduce your melee cooldown. So if an enemy is just sitting there doing nothing, you can just lay on the trigger and get a bunch of melee energy back. So what I'm gonna do in this clip here is expend all of my 3 melees and suspend Carl and just lay on the trigger, and let's see how much energy we get. So by the time Carl hits the ground, we're able to get 2 full melee charges back. And it's a pretty decent amount if you're trying to do a melee spam build. Next up, we got the Forerunner, and this is a pretty solid range option to use if you're going with double specials. And this actually does pretty solid damage if you can hit consistent crits with it, but usually that's the problem. But when the enemy is suspended, you can take full advantage of that. Now, once again, I don't have my weapons infused, so it doesn't look like it's doing a lot of damage. But if it was infused, it'd actually be pretty solid. And this next option is pretty interesting and pretty solid. It's the Cold Heart. So you know how sustained damage with this weapon will make the damage of this weapon go up, but it also has Longest Winter, so periodically you will generate Ionic Traces as you're dealing damage, and Ionic Traces actually refund your ability energy to your least charged ability. So check out the clip here. So I put my barricade down, I suspend Carl, I start laying on the trigger, and it's gonna generate Ionic Traces enough for me to get my barricade charge back by the time Carl gets down to the ground. So I can keep on spamming those barricades and keep him suspended pretty much at all times. So it's an interesting option to run the Cold Heart with this build. I wouldn't say it's the best, it's kind of niche, but it's pretty neat. Now, before we talk about the next options here, which in my opinion are the best options, there is something that we have to use to preface this, and that is going to be shatter damage. Now, for those who don't know, when an enemy is frozen, you do more melee damage to them. Not only that, but they also shatter, which is another piece of damage in its own. So with the little test against Carl here, a base melee punch is going to do 10k damage. But upon freezing Carl and then punching him, our base punch damage is going up to 22k damage, and the shatter is causing 11k damage. And that brings us to the next thing, grapple punches. On your Strand subclass with your grapple grenade ability, while you're grappling, you have a free shoulder charge ability. And it does a pretty good amount of damage. So when we go in for the grapple punch against Carl here, we hit 24k damage, but you get 2 damage numbers. That third one you see there is the one that hit the Scion in the background, but you get 2 damage numbers on 1 target. I don't know why it splits the damage like that. It's an area of effect type attack, but that's just how it works. So at the base level, we're doing 49,000 damage. Now, when we go into freeze Carl and then grapple punch him, we're doing 54k damage twice, resulting in 108,000 damage in addition to the shatter damage of 11k. So that is 119,000 damage. That is a pretty strong hit. So pretty much what I'm saying here is that if you can find a way to freeze an ad off of suspend, you can do a lot of damage by grapple punching them. So that brings us to our next option, the Riptide. If you can manage to get yourself a Riptide with chill clip, 2 shots from it will be able to freeze a target. So you can see in the clip here, suspend Carl, shoot him twice, he freezes, I back up in the air, I grapple punch his face, and that is a pretty chunky amount of damage. So the Riptide, I would say, is the most logical option to pair with this build if you're doing more serious content. But if you want to have fun, something that I was using during general play was the Cryosthesia 77k. And you saw it during that meme intro, it can do some pretty interesting things, and it synergizes with this build in 2 different ways. So the first way is obviously you can freeze big targets to get in for that very strong grapple punch. That is the first way it synergizes. The second way it synergizes is with our exotic, the Abeyant Leap itself. So you saw during that meme intro, I would freeze a group of ads, and then when I laid down my barricade, the Abeyant Leap's triple shockwave would go in and hit those ads, and it causes the frozen targets to actually shatter, causing that free 11k shatter damage, and it does a pretty good amount of damage to do some group ad clear. And whatever enemies manage to survive that shockwave will get suspended, so you can take advantage of that in other ways. But it doesn't stop there for the Cryosthesia. There's one more thing we need to talk about. This thing is actually bugged with the Abeyant Leap Exotic. So normally with the Cryosthesia, to get that L2N freeze burst off, you have to get a kill with the Cryosthesia. Then you hold your reload button and you can go ahead and shoot it at the floor or at an enemy and freeze them. However, when you get a kill on a frozen target with your Drenger's/barricade, clickbait, you don't get your L2N freeze burst back. But for some weird reason, I don't know why this happens, but if you get a multi-kill on multiple frozen targets with your Drenger's/barricade, it will for some reason refund your L2N Cryosthesia freeze burst. So you can chain it infinitely as long as you're getting multi-kills. Don't know why this is, and that is definitely a bug, no doubt about that. Now you might have seen briefly during my menuing that I am using the Xenoclass 4 because it has 1-2 punch. Now a 1-2 punch shotgun, whether it be kinetic or energy, should be a staple of this build. And the reason for that is because, like I said, dealing damage doesn't cause the enemy to become unsuspended, so you can just go to town on their face, just 1-2 punching them all day long until they die. And that is a pretty solid and ammo efficient option. Now going up against Carl here, as you can see, it shreds him just as fast as the Legend of Acreus did, except this is a special shotgun and a lot more ammo efficient. So a 1-2 punch shotgun is definitely the way to go with suspension builds. But Maven, does 1-2 punch work with your Strand melee ability? Well, let's test that out. So we go in for our Frenzied Blade, it does 32k. Now we try to do it with 1-2 punch, and it does 64k. It does indeed work. But usually, the 1-2 punch perk becomes inactive once a melee attack connects, but not for charged melee abilities. Therefore, how many melees can we get off before 1-2 punch deactivates? Well, as it turns out by this next clip here, we can get off 2 frenzied blades with 1-2 punch damage. The third one does not connect. So the combo here is to go shotgun, frenzy blade, and that does a lot of damage, over 150,000 damage. And this is one of the main reasons why you want a 1-2 punch shotgun. So generally, this would be my loadout of choice. Got the Riptide and the Xenoclast for that heavy damage on fatter enemies. And then for some range and for some ad clear, I got a machine gun. I would highly recommend a machine gun. Now, my machine gun of choice is going to be the Corrective Measure Time Loss. It has Demolitionist Adrenaline Junkie, which is very good for ad clear and also very good for grenade spam. So it'll help you get back that grapple ability a lot quicker so that you can spam freezes with the Riptide and do that little shatter combo. But if you do not like the fact that there is no exotic being used here, then you can throw on the Thunderlord for ad clear. Now let's talk about the rest of our abilities here. We got the Quick Charging Rally Barricade. Obviously you want the quicker barricade to spam that ability from your exotic more. And I don't have a lot of fragments, obviously, because the Lightfall just came out yesterday, but this is the one that they start you with. But thank goodness it actually has extremely good synergy with this build. Threat of Mind, defeating suspended targets grants class ability energy. So kill that suspended target and you get some barricade energy back so you can spam your exotic's ability more. So that's great. And then these next 2 fragments are something that I actually went and bought with my materials. So I bought Thread of Fury, damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy. And I'll show you in a test here how much melee energy that actually grants. Now, when I throw the Tangle at this goblin, we get about 30 to 40% of a melee charge back, which is not too bad, but it does actually stack when you hit more targets. So when I hit a group here, we get a full entire charge back, which is pretty good. So even though this fragment lowers your strength, I think the trade-off is pretty worth it. And you are going to be creating a lot of tangles because your Frenzied Blade melee ability severs targets. And when you defeat a severed target, it creates a tangle. And also, not to mention, when you defeat a suspended target, it unravels them, and that'll also create a tangle. And the unraveling ability is actually very good for ad clear because it spreads those little seekers around. It's kind of like the Siva nanites. It's pretty solid. And then for the last fragment, we got Thread of Warding. So picking up an Orb of Power is another way to give you Woven Mail because, you know, we want to have 100% uptime of Woven Mail. Not only does it make us bulky, but it also has synergy with Into the Fray, giving us melee ability energy. So a way that we're going to make Orb of Power is on our helmet, we have several Siphon mods. We got Stasis Siphon. This was for the Cryosthesia I was using, but also works with Riptide. And then I got Void Siphon. So when I get double kills with my Corrective Measure, I'm going to make an Orb of Power. Now, I do want to talk about the potential of running the Shackle Grenade, but first I have to talk about our mod setup because this kind of ties into it. And thank goodness there's no elemental affinity on our stuff anymore, so we can mix and match a lot of things we previously couldn't, and it makes ability spam a lot better than it ever has been. And also shoutouts to this new mod screen. It's going to make it really easy to talk about builds. So on our helmet, of course, we got the siphons. I had a little bit of extra energy, so I ran a heavy ammo scout to help out my teammates. On my boots, I have a copy of Innervation, Invigoration, and Insulation. That's going to make it so when we pick up an Orb of Power, it's going to grant some ability energy to all 3 of our abilities. That's very solid, seeing as how we're making a ton of orbs. And then on our gloves, this is where it gets interesting. So Focusing Strike makes it so when I deal damage with a melee, I get granted some barricade energy back. Impact Induction makes it so when I would deal damage with a melee, I get granted some grenade energy. Grenade Kickstart, obviously you know what that does. I expend my grapple ability, I get some grapple ability back. So with these 2 right here, I can get a lot of grenade energy and I can get a lot of barricade energy because of my 3 Frenzied Blade charges that we're spamming all over the place. And then on our class item, we got a combination of things that we can never mix and match because this was a Void mod, this was an Arc mod, and this was a Solar mod, but we can now have them all together. So basically what having these 3 mods will do is that when we cast our barricade, we'll get a chunk of grenade energy, melee energy, and barricade energy back all together. That's going to make it insane for ability spam on top of having these Invigoration, Insulation, all these kind of mods on our boots, and these 3 mods on our gloves. We're just getting so much energy back for all 3 of our abilities for basically everything we do. And then for the chest piece, it's not really too interesting. There's really not much going for the chest here. We got charged up so we can have another stack of armor charge. When we pick up those orbs, we get granted armor charge, by the way. And when we have 3 armor charge stacks, we got emergency reinforcements. So if our shields break and we get into the red, we get some extra damage resistance. So it helps save our life in some tough situations. And now with all those mods explained, now that you know what's going on here, especially with the gloves, how when we deal damage with the melee, we get some grenade energy and barricade energy, it is now time to talk about the potential of the shackle grenade. So here is where it gets kind of broken. So with this setup, especially with the mods in our gloves, we are able to keep a target suspended 100% of the time, or at least for a very long time. Now we're gonna do an example here against Carl, and we're not actually gonna hit Carl in this clip because it would kill him, so we're just gonna show an example of what would happen. So for this setup, we're gonna be using the Wither Horde and the Xenoclast for 1-2 punch. So we would place down the barricade, suspend Carl, and we would shoot a Wither Horde at him and then start 1-2 punching. The punches from the 1-2 punch would trigger focusing strike and impact induction, giving us back some grenade energy and rally barricade energy. Once Carl becomes unraveled, we would throw our shackle grenade, which would resuspend him. During that time, we would reset the combo with the Wither Horde and the 1-2 punch shotgun. And again, the punches would cool down your grenade and your barricade. By the time that Carl becomes unraveled again is when we would have our barricade energy back and we'd be able to cast our barricade and suspend him again. The punches would trigger impact induction and we would get our grenade back. And just like that, we can keep Carl suspended 100% of the time. So if you ever run into a tough enemy, and most enemies in the game are capable of being suspended, by the way. So you run into a tough enemy, you can just pretty much keep them suspended so that your team can just wail on that enemy, and it just makes any tough enemy not an issue. Now, I did some testing in the Sorrow's Harbor and Altars of Sorrow because the nightmares there are classified as bosses, and the suspension does not work against them. So any enemy in the game that is coded as a boss cannot be suspended, but anything in the game that is not coded as a boss can be. And that is a good amount of stuff in the game. Now, with some of that information explained in the last 5 minutes, that brings us to the option of potentially using a glaive, and the glaive can be paired with Wither Horde quite well. Suspend an enemy, you just wail on them with the glaive, and that's a pretty solid DPS option, and you can keep them suspended 100% of the time with that shackle grenade. But what sucks about using a glaive is that you can't use your charged melee ability, which would kind of change the entire build and make it not really a melee spam build, so you'd have to change it up entirely. So I wouldn't recommend using a glaive, even though it seems pretty appealing to just wail on a suspended enemy with a glaive. So now on to the wrap up. This is a loadout I would recommend. This is a loadout I would recommend. This is a loadout I would recommend. And if you wanted to use the Cryosthesia, then that would be your add clear option, and at that point I'd go with a damage heavy like a rocket launcher if you're gonna run that, and so that would be a loadout I'd recommend right there. And you know, the Cryosthesia can do a lot of fun stuff you saw in the intro. Now on to the wrap up of the wrap up. I think this build has a lot of potential for endgame content like Grandmasters, because with your setup, your barricade is coming back so quickly and you can just spam it everywhere in the GM and just suspend all the ads in the room. And you know, they cannot fight back. The thing about GMs is that you die a lot because the ads are shooting you, but when they're suspended, they can't shoot you for like several seconds. So it's going to be very good for just controlling the area, such as Stasis is. So definitely watch out for the Abeyant Leap Strand Titan build in the future. So that about does it for the Strand Titan build, and if you're new here, consider subscribing because we got a Strand Warlock build on the way here pretty soon, followed by a Strand Hunter build. And I don't mean to toot my own horn here, but on this channel we do pretty unique and innovative builds compared to what other YouTube channels would show off. So with this channel, definitely expect something spicy and different. So that's going to do it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit the like button and drop a comment down below, because interaction on the video in those types of ways really helps the video out in the algorithm. And if you have any ideas of some things that could improve upon this build potentially, let me know because I'd like to try it out. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. Later.